There are 270 nesting species of birds in Montana, and 435 species that we know have at least passed through on their travels. They all make some kinds of noises, and those noises are at least slightly different from each other, and some are radically different. For the birds, this is critical because they can literally go anywhere they want by air. They need a mechanism to find each other for breeding, for nesting, for safety, and for reassurance. And that mechanism is sound. Many male migrants arrive early to sing and to threaten their way to a mating advantage. And when females arrive later, their songs serve as a come hither attraction. But recognizing 400 plus birds by sight quickly is the rarefied air of master birders. Many folks just want the ability to identify and separate the robins from the pigeons. But recognizing 400 plus birds by their songs is on another scale of difficulty, especially if music and pitch don't come easily. But here's the key to the obsessively nerdy act of bird watching and bird ID. We never get good enough. There is always something new to learn and a new elusive rare bird to chase. You can add a third bird to the robin and pigeon list, or your 433rd to your Montana list. Almost all of us are somewhere between and in process. Birding by eye is hard enough, so why add another dimension of complication to it by learning bird sounds as well? Well, there are actually 4 good reasons. Number 1, you love music and birds invented it. Number 2, you're an auditory dominant learner. Number 3, advantageously, while birding by sight, you know where to look to see a bird and who to look for. And number 4, if you choose, you can go birding without your binoculars and never look for them at all. And really, isn't making new friends partly about learning their language first? A lot of people never actually hear birdsong. They walk through the woods and birdsong is just background white noise, something they have never paid attention to, unfortunately for them, I think. Once you do begin to notice them, on a spring morning with 30 birds singing all at the same time, the idea of learning the differences between all of them is completely overwhelming. Fret not. We have all been there. Isolate one bird, learn the song, and move on to a second one. I started there myself, and then the addiction began. For encouragement, you can do this. But, warning, it takes patience. Another warning, you will never be done. As that wise Saturday Night Live sage Rosanna Donna often said, there's always something. What I eventually realized, thinking about thinking, that's called meta-thinking, I guess, is that I used a process of elimination that mechanical troubleshooters or cops after a suspect have used for hundreds of years. You keep eliminating possibilities until there is only one conclusion or suspect or bird species left on the list. And here's how. We're going to do the binary search process of elimination, starting with very broad categories. For example, if it has fur, it might be a mammal. If it has feathers, it might be a bird. You keep splitting them into 2 or more types until you're down to specific species. The first categories eliminate the most birds from consideration, and the last categories get to the fine points of identifying a very specific bird. Using this method by visual birding, here's the way it works. By eye, the first thing I do to get to eliminate a lot of birds is, what season are we in? Basically, if you're in winter Half of our species are gone. They've migrated. They're out of here. Secondly, I look for, and I already know, of course, what geographic region I am in. For instance, if you're in northwest Montana or if you're in Glacier National Park, it's a bit different from being in the Badlands of southeastern Montana or on the prairies or in the marshes in between. The third thing that separates down a lot of birds and eliminates them is what habitat you're in. For instance, if you're in a marsh, you're not going to see treetop birds very often. If you're on the creek shore, certain kinds of birds will be there. If you're in the mature woods, a different set. A recent fire, that separates out a lot of the birds. Open prairie, alpine, on and on and on. So where you are and what you're looking at, what kind of land you are on, will make a huge difference in terms of the birds that will still be possibilities for what you're doing next, which is to look for, by eye, the shape or the posture or the silhouette. Basically, the reason I look for this first is because the light is so often bad. It's sometimes against the sky and all you're going to see is a posture or a silhouette or a shape. The light has to be behind you to see color very well, which is way down my list of the things that will separate out birds. Number 5 is behavior. What's the bird doing? Is it going from flower to flower and hovering? Is it soaring? Is it flapping? Is it leaning back and forth on branches that go up and down trunks and so on and so forth? What it's doing can really tune you into what kind of possibilities you still have left. Number 6, field marks. Field marks really are not colors of a bird. When you get bad light, which is the usual thing that happens, you look for dark spots and light spots and spots in between. So basically it's black to white and all sorts of shades of gray. And where those spots are on a bird will often get right specifically down to the bird that you're looking at. It works especially well for waterfowl at a distance. Well, I look for white spots on ducks and find out where they are. Has to do a lot with who they are. Number 7 is the flight pattern. For instance, if it goes brrrt and then assumes a kind of a bullet shape and brrrt again and bullet shape, automatically you're looking at probably of the woodpecker family. So how birds fly, whether they fly in a circle soaring like a raven or another blackbird that looks almost identical to it, a crow, will be flapping more than soaring. Number 8, finally, we get to color, and you need front lighting for that. If you get good front lighting, as in the sun is behind you, then you get the eye candy effect, where you're going to see all those nuances of color, and that makes a big difference. But it takes a while to get there, and sometimes you never do. You have to remember that you may not ever see the color of the bird. And finally, 9 is the size, which is the least reliable, especially when birds are flying. You have to have something to compare them to. You don't have a pin to stick next to a flying bird to say, oh, that thing is the size of an eagle, or that thing's the size of a wren. Obviously, they're going to fly and behave differently, but size is not a terrifically reliable thing unless you have something to compare it with. By contrast, when I'm birding by ear, the first 3 categories are the same. Okay, what season am I in? So how many birds should I consider? 2, what geographic region am I in the state of Montana? 3, what kind of habitat I'm in. That will eliminate a whole lot of birds, whether you're seeing them or hearing them. And then finally, you divert a little bit from the vision methods of seeing birds and identifying birds by sound. General sound characteristics is the first thing I look for, like, is it a whistle? You can tell that that's a whistly bird. A croak, could be a great blue heron. You're looking probably at a duck. If you hear a trill, like, or in the case of the varied thrush, like that, you're probably listening to one of the members of the thrush family, or possibly a wren. And there are oddball ones as well, like onk, 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 which would be a bittern doing its mating thing out in the marsh. Once you've got it in one of those categories, then you can start thinking about the musical parts of it all. For instance, pitch. There's the great gray owl, which goes woo, 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 really low pitched, or the golden crowned kinglet, which I'm getting to the point at my age where I can barely hear it. I have to be pretty close to be able to hear it. It is so high pitched. And of course, birds, songs, and calls have every pitch in between. But pitch will get you somewhere in terms of eliminating the possibilities. Certainly a kinglet is going to eliminate great gray owl and ruffed grouse. Number 6 is the cadence. Cadence is sort of like rhythm. The black-capped chickadee, for instance, when they're doing their mating song in the springtime, they go cheeseburger, goes like that. But their really close relative, the mountain chickadee, instead of saying cheeseburger, says cheese just cheese, or sometimes cheese just cheese, and it goes. That would be the mountain chickadee. So the cadence and the rhythm of a song, even though it's the same pitch, can mean the difference between one species and another. And usually when you hear that, it's a closely related species. Now, I'm mimicking most of these bird songs myself, and that's something I really have a difficult time teaching. But I will throw in, if it's difficult for me to do, like for instance, a lot of the warblers are so high-pitched that I will not be able to mimic them very well at all. So I will toss in the actual recorded bird songs in that kind of a situation. The 7th thing I look for after cadence is the speed of the song. A Pacific wren sings 36 notes per second. It's probably the most complex and fastest song in the world, some people think. And it just has these series of trills that go all over the place. And I can't do a very good imitation of it, but it's very fast. And then, of course, the common loon would be a very slow song. Things like, which is their wail. You want to start a concert kind of a song. That's a very slow song, so the speed can be anywhere in between, but that's another hint as to who you're listening to. And finally, I also listen for pacing. Pacing means how much of a gap is there between the songs. How are they spaced? Like, for instance, the vireos are a classic example of that. There's a red-eyed vireo that lives here that does, "How are you? I am fine. How are you? I am fine." And it goes like, "How are you? I am fine." But the Cassin's vireo, which lives a little bit more in a mixed forest situation toward evergreens, so if you're looking at habitat, does a lot of space between the songs. And it usually just asks the question, "How are you?" and never really gets an answer. And interestingly enough, that used to be called the solitary vireo until they split it into Cassins and blue-headed east and west. And solitary vireo kind of refers to the fact that it never gets an answer. And it sounds like, so in review, what season is it? What geographical area I'm in? What habitat am I looking at? What are the general sound characteristics? And what's the pitch of the bird? Then I can really start narrowing the bird down to cadence and speed and pacing and coming up with some sort of conclusion. Another thing that you have to look for is the difference between a bird song and a bird call. A song is usually longer and more melodic for territory and mating, versus a call, which is much more of a warning, short contact call or a begging call. It's usually shorter and more like a chip, chip, chip kind of a thing, depending upon what species you're looking at. Some examples would be like a veery, which is a thrush that lives on the east side of mountains and often all the way to the east coast. A veery has this sort of descending spiral song, and I'll give it a try here in terms of mimicking it. It goes... You see how it spirals kind of down, but it's very melodic. Its call, on the other hand, sounds like somebody saying weird back in the woods, and it sounds like... That's one difference between a song and a call. Another example would be the black-capped chickadee, which you heard going... That's the song, but it will go chickadee-dee-dee-dee-dee, and there's probably maybe 21 or more different variations on the kinds of sounds that a black-capped chickadee can make. But the chickadee-dee-dee-dee is actually a call. It means danger, danger, danger. And the mountain chickadee, kind of buzzy, and the boreal chickadee is very, very quiet, like a whispery kind of a chickadee, like. Interesting thing about chickadees is that they have varying degrees of their warning call. Black-capped chickadees, for instance, if they see a person walking through the woods, binoculars, and they're thinking, oh, danger, danger, two-legged, bare-faced thing coming with long black eyes, checking a list, their degree of warning is going to be sort of half-hearted because people don't eat chickadees, and they know that. And it goes like chickadee-dee-dee, and that's about it, maybe 3 Ds, chickadee-dee-dee. But if a red-tailed hawk, which eats larger birds for the most part, doesn't really eat chickadees very much either, but it represents danger, then they're going to go chickadee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee, maybe 4, 5, 6 different Ds. And of course, when there is a merlin, which eats chickadees, or a sharp-shinned hawk, which eats chickadees, their warning is going to be more like a chickadee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee. It's going to be pretty unmistakable, but that it's danger to chickadees, period. That actually works for interspecies communication because most of the species of not just birds, but mammals as well in the woods will also be able to understand what that song means. If there's a chickadee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee going on, then all of the small birds know exactly that they should be freezing. Like little nuthatches will sometimes freeze in place for minutes at a time without even blinking and moving at all so that they don't get spotted. It's kind of an interesting concept to have interspecies communication. Most of the work on that's been done by the University of Montana, by the way. And repertoires that different birds have. The common loon, for instance, has 4 different kinds of songs. The first one is a local call, mom to dad. Basically, this is sort of a contact call. I'm over here, and it goes like this. And that means, I'm okay, you okay? Sometimes it's a reminder of the male to the female or vice versa to come and take your turn keeping the eggs warm. The second thing that loons will do is called the wail, which is more of communication with other loons. And it sounds like a wolf howl, a bit high-pitched. It goes... When you hear a wail, it means to other loons, if you're on another branch of the lake and you're in your own territory, even over the hill on another lake, it's sort of a contact call between loons, and they usually have demilitarized zones out in the middle of lakes where they can do some group fishing without too much of a hassle with each other. That loon wail means, is there anybody out there? Do you want to start a concert? And that will often get the loons talking to each other, which some enterprising naturalists have used in the past to get loons talking to them. There is another kind of wail. If you don't hear that little voice crack in the center of the wail, if it goes up and down very smoothly, like that, rather than in the middle, you should always look straight up, because about 9 times out of 10 there will be an eagle right above you. That is their only real natural enemy. They do steal a lot of loon chicks, and that is their signal to each other that there's an eagle, and we have to be careful and guard the chicks. I use the loons to tell me when there's eagles around, so they're good helpers in terms of birding by sight. And the next one, number 3, that a loon will do is the one you hear most often. It's called the tremolo, and it goes. That's the laugh kind of a thing that you make them sound loony, I guess. And that is their danger signal. Although just a like that means, yeah, there might be danger, I'm not sure about it, but this is just kind of a warning. If their voice cracks and they go like that, it jumps an octave and then comes back down again, then it's pretty serious. This is really a warning, and everybody better take cover. And when they're really, really agitated, like for instance when predator around, or another male that's going to come over to challenge a male loon, or when something is endangering the chicks, like the photographer trying to get the ultimate loon picture by being way too close, they're going to go. They'll jump 2 octaves, so that's it's a stage 3 tremolo. And that tremolo is a serious tremolo indeed. Usually you're going to see some behavior like walking on water, where they stand up or upright. They've only got legs way back on their body, and they are upright and flapping their wings, and they're doing a vulture dance across the water, or they're doing a penguin dance with their wings folded in. That's a pretty serious alarm call. Finally, the males do a pretty complex song. This is their only real song, which is called the yodel, and it starts out with a wail, but then it moves into a bunch of dipsy-doos, sort of like this. It goes. They often do another tremolo at the very end of that. And since the yodel is done by male loons only, it basically is a stay out guys, come on in ladies kind of a thing about territory and about mating. The interesting thing about the yodel is that it is a distinctive song for each bird. In other words, it's like a fingerprint by sound. Mortimer over on one side of the lake might be singing, but George over on the other side of the lake might be going. So every single loon, if you put it on a sonogram so you can actually see the differences in the pitches and the rhythm and the pacing, you can tell who is who, which can be very handy if you're doing loon research. One of the things I should mention when we're talking about calls of birds is that a lot of times people will use calls. There's a little mechanism that I have right in front of me now. I'm going to do it. It's called an Audubon bird call, and some people do the same thing by pishing, by going psh, 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 or something like that. And this one, the little Audubon bird call, sounds like. The shorter and higher pitched a bird is doing its call, usually the more feels like it's in danger and the more stress that it's in. And there's been a real shift in the way people think about calling birds these days. Instead of playing their songs from a phone in your hand and having them come in the nesting season when their energy requirements are already very, very sketchy in terms of balancing out how much energy they use and how much it's going to cost them to try to migrate later on. To be safe, Most birders these days are not calling birds in anymore. They're letting the birds do their own thing because there's no real hard evidence that it costs them a tremendous amount of energy. But even if it costs them a little bit to come in and to scold you and to get a good look at what the danger is over there and all that sort of thing, you're using up energy that they need to have a real fine line between living and dying later on. When they're migrating or when the season gets cold. So the thinking these days is don't do it. And I agree with don't do it. I use bird songs and I whistle bird songs quietly when I'm out with people on field trips, but not to call in birds, just to repeat what they just heard if I can do a reasonable imitation of it so that they can learn it. If you get tempted to use recorded bird songs to call birds in, resist the temptation. When you get down to the specifics of certain kinds of birds and certain families of birds, and sometimes birds not even in the same family, they have very similar songs. An example would be, here's an American robin, which everybody knows is cheerio, cheerio. But a western tanager, on the other hand, will sound like a robin. It has a little bit more spacing between the song notes, and it'll sound a little buzzier, like it's a robin with a cold, like. And then the black-headed grosbeak, which sounds sort of like a robin, but a robin on steroids, which means it just sings and sings and sings and sings and sings. And then, of course, the red-eyed vireo, which has that pause, how are you, I am fine. All of those birds sound very, very similar, and the differences are in the way it sort of seems to you. Robins seem like they're being cheery, the tanager seems like it has a cold, the grosbeak seems like it can't stop. The red-eyed vireo has spacing. They all sound very similar with similar pitches, but the nuances, if you're listening for them, are pretty clear. And the thrushes have similar songs. I think I did a veery before, which has a descending spiral. But if it goes up in pitch in terms of an ascending spiral, it's a Swainson's thrush. It's spiraling upward. And if it starts with a single note, as in a hermit would sing, a single note at the beginning and then a bunch of flute notes after that, it's a hermit thrush, which sounds like. And the thrushes very often will change the pitch on every song that they do. The wood thrush, for instance, which is a three-parted song, and it's found in the eastern part of Montana. 3 parts. First part is not very spectacular. Second part's like a flute. And the third part's a trill. But when you put them all together, but then, so on and on and on, it just keeps changing pitch and changing pitch and changing pitch. And the varied thrush, which lives in the old growth, big cedars and hemlocks, also does the same thing, changing pitch, but it sounds like that referee's whistle on the other side, the other end of the football field. And then, and then, and then, and then, keeps changing pitch and changing pitch. That's pretty typical of all of the thrush family. Now, if you're a beginning birder by ear, you're probably already overwhelmed by all the nuances. And the advantage here is that you can play this video over and over and over and over, or start in the middle, or start toward the end, or wherever you want. I'm just going to keep on rolling here, but keep in mind you have to start small and learn one bird at a time. The regional dialects of birds that are closely related to each other are really interesting. When I was first in Glacier National Park, I thought for sure I heard a black-throated green warbler which has a really high-pitched song, and it goes zee 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 zoo zee, very, very high-pitched. I can't do a reasonable imitation. This is what it sounds like on a recording. And of course, black-throated green warbler was not on the Glacier Park checklist for birds. And I thought, oh, I'm so amazing. I just found a brand new bird, and I just moved here to the west from back in Minnesota. Well, turns out it was a regional variation of the Townsend's warbler, which when I finally saw the bird. And I realized that different places mean different, even subplaces of subplaces mean variations in the way the birds sing. So keep in mind, to throw another really big wrench into the gears, these guys have many different kinds of dialects depending on where they live too. You have to kind of listen for the essence of the song. I don't know how to explain it any other way. And one of the cool things about birdsong is that they're so complex. If you slow them down, if you record a song and you slowed it down to 25% speed, quarter speed, a wood thrush, you will be able to see when they do those flute notes and those trills, has 4-part harmony with 1 voice box. Their syrinx, as it's called, is a voice box. Our larynx is what enables me to speak. And their syrinx is actually in the middle between the 2 bronchi tubes that go off to the 2 different lungs. And so it gets air from both sides, so it can do a couple different kinds of pitches at the same time. Pacific wren, for instance, that does 36 notes per second, this is a 2-inch bird, and it weighs fractions of an ounce. And a tiny little bird that sings on and on and on and on and on and on and on, yet never seems to take a breath. Well, it's taking a breath all the time because they can sing on the inhale from the one side of their voice box and on the exhale from the other side of their voice box, which means that they can sing constantly without stopping. The brown thrasher, for instance, which is a bird that's found mostly on the east side of the mountains in northwest Montana, has approximately 3,000 plus songs. There's a lot of complexity there that we will probably never, ever understand. And in terms of bird language, they may be saying many, many, many more things than we ever thought they could. And here's another scary thing when you think you're getting really good. The blue jay and the gray catbird and the common raven seem to be able to mimic a lot of songs of other birds. Oh boy, just what you needed, right? Listen for errors in the song. If a blue jay is trying to emulate a merlin and going like that, they'll do something in the middle there, like that, just to give you a tip-off that it really isn't a merlin. The gray catbird does a beautiful black-headed grosbeak, but it also just throws in this kind of a buzzy bzzz, kind of a buzzy thing every once in a while that, oh no, that's not a black-headed grosbeak. That's a gray catbird doing a black-headed grosbeak. Ravens also are great mimics. As you know, they can be taught to speak, just like the parrots. Polly want a cracker. The red-winged blackbird male will come back in mid-March to late March, usually, sometimes a little bit earlier, and start hassling each other. The males will come back and start singing and puffing out their red epaulets on their shoulders and making all sorts of postures that say I'm bigger and tougher than you, to try to carve out some territory. They arrive about 2 weeks or more earlier than the females. The females don't want to have anything to do with all this macho junk that these males are doing, so they wait. And then once the males have established their territories in the swamp, And some males have bigger territories or more preferable territories for hiding a nest. The females will show up and they'll park themselves at a reasonable distance and just sort of listen and look around to see, that looks like a nice area to make a nest over there, and that looks pretty good over there, and this one male has 4 or 5 of those kinds of places, and I could choose which one I wanted. And so she will sit way off in the distance, maybe 70 or more feet away, and if she spots a red-winged blackbird's territory that she likes, it isn't really about the male blackbird. Guys, you have to remember, it's about the house. It's not about you. So don't get too full of yourselves. So what happens is the female will answer back with her sort of high-pitched, and the male just gets all excited then and starts posturing and singing again. If she stays interested, she's going to move a little closer and answer again. And if she stays interested after that, if she gets a closer look at the kinds of nesting spots, she'll move closer yet. And if she stays interested, she will move all the way in, and if she really spots some places she wants to put a nest, and if she's 10 feet away, her song is going to be right behind his. And then when she actually sits really close, like 3 feet, maybe 4 feet away, and answers this male song in the middle of his song, that's when you know you have a mated pair. And here are some oddballs. Those are songs that are just not like anything else at all. The white-tailed ptarmigan we have in the mountains of Montana sounds fairly similar to this, but a little less involved, and is a really strange sound, croaky kind of a sound. The American bittern, as I did before, also called the slough pumper bird because it sounds like an old hand pump. Onk, onk, onk. The sora is a little tiny rail family member that lives very secluded and secretively in the marshes, and it has this whinny like a horse, like that. It's pretty distinctive song. I've often got them to do that by just clapping my hands together kind of loudly, like that, and for some reason they answer that. I have no idea why. And then there's the long-billed curlew, which lives out on the prairies nearby, and the curlews have this really complex but beautiful whistly kind of a song. The canyon wren has this beautiful song that does sounds like it's running out of gas. The sandhill crane has this sort of a really strange sounding. The belted kingfisher rattle sound like. Greater prairie chickens go blowing up their big neck patches and kind of expelling air out. Common ravens do all sorts of things, and then onk, 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 onk. So there are a lot of oddballs out there which are instantaneous once you learn the birds in terms of who you think they are. And of course there are non-songs that are made some other way, like the ruffed grouse does that thing with its compressing air against its chest slowly and then faster and faster. That's done by compressing air. They never actually strike their chest with their wings when they do that sitting on their drumming log. They actually just compress the air. It's a very low-pitched sound, and the cool thing about that one is because they live in such thick areas, the sound waves are longer because they're low pitched. And the longer the sound waves, the more they wind around and through the brush. And so low sounds, elephants use this out in African savannas in the acacia trees. The low sounds are the ones that will travel the farthest in really thick habitat. The Wilson snipe does this ethereal song that sounds very ventriloquistic. It's really hard to tell where it comes from. If you're out next to an open field that has standing water in it or a sedge marsh in the springtime, they're going to be going. They make that sound by going way up in the air, the males will, and then they will die, go into a dive. It almost looks like they died of a heart attack. They come straight down, and as they build up speed, they fan out their tails, and the outside two tail feathers on their tail will make the sound as they're falling straight down. And then they go back up and start it all over again and straight down and again. Making a sound with your tail like that is called winnowing. So when you make a sound with your tail after eating beans, you have to know what to call it. It's called winnowing. The common nighthawk does the very same thing, but a very different sound. It does it with its wings. It goes into a dive and puts its wings out in a certain position, and the wings does a steep dive and then curves back upward. It does a whoa. The male's way of attracting the girls as well. And woodpeckers and sapsuckers make a lot of attracting sounds with pecking on trees. The louder the surface they have, the better. They like tin roofs and things like that so that they can advertise for miles around. The woodpeckers, like pileated woodpeckers, will be tapping really hard and but very, very, very hard. Sapsuckers have this strange tapping that they do, which sounds like they're running out of gas. It goes, and then the spruce grouse, which is different than the ruffed grouse. The spruce grouse lives in medium-sized lodgepole pines. Spruce grouse jumps out of the tree, but just before it lands, it folds its wings way back and smacks their wings like a like that, maybe once or twice behind their head. And so if you hear a whack, then you know you're listening to a spruce grouse male doing its non-song. Learning bird sounds is mostly about patience, and it's about repetition. Two of the things actually that can help quite a lot are apps on your phone that have bird songs on them, like the iBird app and the Sibley Guide to Birds and Merlin and some of those other apps that are on your phone. They often offer a lot of different variations on the songs of birds, and you can just play them over and over and over again. They're very, very useful in terms of repetition. And they're also useful for checking if you think you know what it is when you're out in the field. So you might say, how do I remember bird songs? And repetition, as I said before, is the big key. If you're more visually oriented than you are sound oriented, you can also do visual mnemonics, which is basically making up words to the cadence and the pitch and the sounds of bird songs. Like I just mentioned, cheeseburger was with the black-capped chickadee, and then cheese, just cheese of the mountain chickadee. The trick to doing mnemonics is to use your words, the words that this bird's song reminds you of, and that way you can remember it better because you attached the words to the song. The other part about learning bird songs is there's no substitute for seeing the birds sing. If you ever get a chance to see them sing, you can make that visual versus auditory connection a lot easier, and your brain can store it a lot easier that way. So here's what I've come up with in terms of a visual mnemonic kind of a process. I like to write the words that the bird song reminds me of. Like, for instance, if there's a ruby-crowned kinglet, I write that down as me, 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 you, 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 and me, me, me is higher on the page and you, you is lower. And then the medium get the heebie-jeebies, 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 heebie-jeebies. So that's the way I see the ruby-crowned kinglet song. And you can do nuances in those words. Not only is it up on the page or down on the page, depending on the pitch. You can also, if it's slurred, you can draw a line between the words. For instance, a common yellow throat says this, so it's witchity, 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 witch. Chewitchity, witchity, witchity, witch is the way that I put it. And a chewitch is higher, and then itty goes down with slurred lines between it, as you can see in the illustration. And then sometimes I have a vertical line between the word, which is a break or a staccato kind of a thing where there's a pause. Like pileated woodpeckers, they do this when they're unsure about what they're seeing. And I just draw a vertical line between each of those wuck, 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 wuck things as I'm looking at it and thinking about it. Sometimes the word will curve up or down, called a glissade. If you've had a choral music background, like a pine siskin has this, but much higher pitch than I can do it. So I just put preet, and I have a curved line of the letters, P-R-E-E-E-E-E-E-E-E, up to the top. So there's all sorts of ways to give yourselves a visual representation of what you're hearing, and that's going to help you a whole lot, especially if you don't have perfect pitch. Aside from don't forget to practice, I only have one parting piece of advice. At least half of the fun of birdsong is listening to birdsong. Don't obsess about identification. Wherever you are, there will be birds. Find a spot in the woods, in a field, in a chair on the porch, and just listen. It's the original music, as old as time itself. Close your eyes and let your heart sing into the sky like birdsong. It's much more fun to be in the choir.